Okay, now we're going to look at the back, or example 4 of day 5 characteristics or properties of quadrilaterals. Find the missing measures of a square. So now we got to remember, like a square, all 4 sides are congruent, all 4 angles make right angles, diagonals are perpendicular, diagonals bisect each other. There's just a ton of properties for this one. So we know in a square that AD equals 11, it says. So nice thing about a square, you know all the outsides are the same. We know this is 90 degrees. So let's see, BC is going to be 11. Let's look at AC is a diagonal. So what I did is I know that angle B is 90 degrees. So I did 11 squared plus 11 squared equals C squared. I don't know the hypotenuse here. I don't know this diagonal, but I know this makes a right angle. So you use Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to square root 242. So we'll say about 15.6. Okay? Alright, so if the diagonal AC is about 15.6. BD is the other diagonal, and diagonals are congruent. EC is going to be half of a diagonal, so we're going to divide 15.6 divided by 2 and get 7.8. Let's look at angles. Angles and squares are my favorite because they're basically going to be either 90 or, because every corner is 90 and the diagonals are 90, and the angles are bisected. So you just have to know half of 90 is 45. So DAB, well that's a corner, we know that one's 90. AEB, well that's at the center, we know that one's 90. CBD, that's this angle here, that's half of an angle, so that's 45. And BAC, again, that's half of an angle, so that's 45. So that works in squares only, where it's half the angle, it's going to be half of 90, because that's the only shape that has the rhombus characteristics of dividing and the rectangle characteristics of it being 90. Alright, we're going to do trapezoids next. Trapezoids have one set of parallel sides, so we know consecutive angles are supplementary. So, if you take 180 minus 87, that gives this one is 93. 180 minus 51, this angle would be 129. This one is called an isosceles trapezoid because you see the little congruent signs here. So base angles are congruent, and then the consecutive ones you still have to subtract from 180. So W is 47 degrees, Y is 133, and Z would be 133. Another one, on this one, it says DEFG is an isosceles trapezoid. The key with an isosceles trapezoid is diagonals are congruent, and legs are congruent. So in this case, they want to know side DG would be congruent to what side. So in this picture, DG would be congruent to EF, to make it isosceles. DF is a diagonal, and diagonals are congruent, so DF is congruent to EG, the other diagonal. Okay? So just a property of side lengths and diagonals with isosceles trapezoids. We're going to skip kites. We didn't do kites the other day, so there aren't any kites on the test, so we're just going to skip kites. Kites are kind of more, they're up there by like a parallelogram. They have kites, in general, this is just some information about kites. The kite in the middle is perpendicular. This side's congruent to this side, this side's congruent to that side. We don't have any parallel lines, so it's not a parallelogram, which is why it didn't fall in any of our other ones. It's its own unique. A rhombus comes from a parallelogram and a kite, but since kites weren't our focus, they're not taught in some textbooks, but they are taught in other ones. That's why it was on here. But I chose not to teach it this year. We have plenty of other shapes to talk about that are in all geometry books. So we're going to skip kites and just focus on our parallelogram, rhombus, rectangle, square, and trapezoids.